Hey guys, and welcome back to the Virtual Reality Show, where we talk about any and all things related to virtual reality inside virtual reality. I'm your host, PHIA, and today we have a special guest, Joakim. And Joakim, you actually do a bunch of VR-related stuff, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and talk about kind of your interest in VR?
Yeah, sure. So I run a philosophical blog, which sort of sprang out from my research because I'm doing a PhD in virtual reality, and I was also interested in sort of the philosophical aspects of this medium. So I've been writing philosophy on virtual reality for the last couple of years, and now I'm also doing some of this on YouTube at a channel that is called AltVR, where I'm showing some videos of maybe alternative uses of VR applications. Yeah, so that's a short summary.
Well, wonderful, because obviously I'm very big into VR too, so it's really cool to be talking to someone who's also interested in those philosophies. That's actually one of the major reasons that I wanted to make this show, is because I'm so interested in all the philosophies behind it, and I found myself reading lots of books and stuff. So I am a little curious, just for my own personal reasons, with the PhD in VR. I didn't even know that was like an option of something that somebody could study. So can you tell me a little bit more about exactly what you do for that?
Yeah, sure. So it's within information science. So basically how we can use information and how computers and information are shaping human lives, how we can use it to good and that kind of stuff. So for my research in particular, I am researching how we can use virtual reality to create memory palaces. So sort of have some visuals and spatial places for us to store our information and what kind of relationships we can develop to these places.
Well, that's super duper awesome. So thank you for sharing about that. That's really cool. So the thing that we wanted to talk about today was kind of this whole idea about identity relating to VR. Because when we're in here and talking to each other, obviously you don't look like an alien in real life, and I don't look like a 3D anime girl, unfortunately. But we do have this power of choice within VR where we can choose to be whoever we want, we get to express ourselves in any way. And for me, I got to create my avatar, and I created something that is now this virtual representation of myself, which is such an interesting concept. So I want to kind of get your thoughts and opinions on identity and virtual embodiment. What does this mean if we're no longer tied to one physical form?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, for sure. I think that what is interesting about it is that, I mean, in normal life, we are to a certain extent given an appearance. Of course, we can change it through clothes and how we exercise. I mean, how we treat our bodies and how we clothe ourselves. But in VR, you have the capability to really change it from the bottom up. You can be something with 8 legs or whatever. So the sort of total freedom, not just freedom relative to what you're given from beforehand, is very interesting, and I think it has the potential to show ourselves who we are in a certain way, because we can define it and sort of wear our inner lives wear our heart on our sleeves in another way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's so interesting. Like you said, it's kind of like we can be a more true version of ourselves, because I feel like it's really hard in day-to-day life when you are stuck with your one singular appearance, and that is what, for better or for worse, what a lot of people will judge you on, and what they see is kind of how they interpret you and interpret your existence. But when we're inside of VR, you having the control over that therefore controls how other people subconsciously perceive you. And so I think that's such an interesting idea, that we then have this choice in almost controlling, not only the inside of ourselves, but then the outside of ourselves. So what are your thoughts then on perception, do you think that's like a better thing that now people can look at you for what you want to be, or do you think there's maybe some negatives that come with that and maybe like manipulating or controlling or losing yourself in that process?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think that generally it's not a big problem, and of course we have already had online identities for a really long time, and like in online games, you can create avatars. Of course, it's a bit more special when you actually can see that you are this thing, and yeah, you identify with it more strongly, right? So it's different then for sure, but I think it's mostly interesting because it's a way to learn what kind of stuff we want to do. It can provide new experiences, and I also think that maybe for people who are not social otherwise, maybe VR can provide an alternative to actually socially interact with people, and it is different than talking through text or whatever. You know, you have this feeling of social presence, of actually being present with another sentient being, which I think is healthy. So, and especially I mean, now during these times when normal kinds of socializing isn't really possible. I mean, it provides some great benefits, and yeah, I'm not really worried. Of course, there will always be examples of things that maybe aren't healthy, but I don't think it's necessarily caused by the VR technology. So I haven't seen any negative effects so far.
Yeah, I think it's definitely almost all like good things right now. But it is kind of interesting this idea that you could potentially get lost in yourself, because I know like from my experience, the very first time that I put on my VR headset, I already had my PHIA model that I've created. So the first time I went into
Oh
VR
yeah.
chat, I already had that model, and I immediately went and found one of those mirrors that everybody stands in front of, and I stood in front of this mirror and I was looking at myself. And it felt so surreal because that was me, you know? And there's kind of a difference in when you look at yourself and you think, "Oh, that's an avatar," versus when you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, "This is also a version of myself." And so I really like that we're having this discussion because it's really important to me that I actually have a very solid identity in both my real physical, real PHIA body, as well as my digital one that I've created. I feel like it is still an extension of me. And I feel like I can't
Mm.
almost say which one is necessarily the true version of me, right? Because I identify and I can manipulate and control this one just like I do with my real body. It just might not be to the same physical extent. But it's still how I perceive this virtual world. And so I think it's so interesting
Yeah.
that it's like, in a way, these are both the real me's, and we so often place this identity of like what's real or not real inside of the physical world, but it almost makes you wonder, could this be just as real? Is this just as real of a me,
Mm.
you know? And I think that's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree, really. It's a good point. And what is also very curious, I mean, in terms of, you mentioned the mirror,
Hmm.
because in studies on virtual embodiments, they always use this mirror to make people identify with the virtual bodies to get like a true virtual embodiment. Because you're used to standing in front of a mirror, that's normally how we perceive ourselves, right? We move to this way and you can see and change. So, what is interesting about the virtual embodiment thing is that it is the same processes, like in your mind, that is actually, yeah, how would I say, that is actually causing you to identify with your real body, that is causing you to
Mm.
identify with your virtual one. So, to a certain extent, for your brain, while you are in the process of virtual embodiment, then no, there is no difference in terms of how your brain is identifying what is your body and what is not. So this is really exemplified with, if you've heard of the example of the rubber hand illusion. They take like a rubber hand and place it in front of you, and they hide your real hand behind like
Ooh.
a thing, and then they rub the real hand with a feather like this, and they're also simultaneously using a feather on the rubber hand.
Mhm.
And since you are feeling the physical sensation of the feather on the real hand, but you're seeing it on the rubber hand, then your brain is guessing that the feelings are coming from the rubber hand. So you identify with that hand. And they're doing this in VR as well, and it really works. So if they then come at you with a fork to stick at the real rubber hand,
Oh, no.
then you can't really, yeah. So it works. It's the same processes.
No, that's so, like, really so crazy to think about, that it's like so much of our physical experience is actually in our heads, and it has to do not with what's really happening around us, but with how we're perceiving things. And that's the crazy part. And it kind of ties into what we wanted to talk about next, which is like these virtual environments that we create for ourselves. So not only are you getting to choose your body, but you then immerse yourself in a virtual world that you get to choose and create. And then, with the rubber hand kind of in mind, if things are happening around you in that virtual world, then your brain perceives that those things are actually happening around you, and your body reacts and responds to that. So I want to talk about kind of your thoughts on that for a minute, on how this freedom of choice with environment, what does that kind of mean to you?
Yeah. Again, I think that the interesting thing about that is seeing what kind of things people will create. So what will the environments that we end up creating tell us about ourselves, what we would rather like to do, right? Because again, in the real world, we have some constraints, right? We have weather, we have materials, we have economy, etc. And of course, to a certain extent, in developing virtual worlds, you have that too. But in the future, what kind of worlds will we end up creating? And I'm not sure. When I'm creating my mind palace, I'm doing a new version right now, which I'm going to show in a video. Then I'm trying to do like vast libraries because I like the aesthetic of it, right? So
Right.
I want big things with wood, tall roofs, etc. And I don't know, it's interesting. But I'm not sure. I'm generally not worried. I'm generally interested in seeing what kind of stuff people will end up creating, and we're seeing some of it here on VR chat. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
VR chat is a very great example of everything that we're discussing right now. I mean, in terms of avatars, in terms of environments. So yeah, it's a good question. I think it will at least be somewhat symptomatic of ourselves in a way, whatever people end up creating.
I agree. So I think it's really good that you brought up the whole VR chat thing, because that's actually the biggest reason that I love VR and got into VR and wanted one so bad is that when I played VR chat for the first time on desktop, I saw that there was all these worlds that people had created on here, and that's the most exciting part for me. Is specifically what the moment that I decided I needed a VR headset was somebody on VR chat took me to a Legend of Zelda themed world, and I'm a really, really, really big Legend of Zelda fan. And so for me,
Yeah, me too.
yeah, so when I saw that you could visit like Termina and Hyrule and all these different places out of Zelda games, I was like, this is all I've ever wanted in my whole life is to go to these places. And I was like, whoa, like this is crazy. So I decided to get the headset, and going into those worlds for the first time, it's so surreal because I've always dreamt of experiencing them. Since I was a little kid, I've always wanted to go to Hyrule and, be Link in a way and, go save the Princess Zelda and all that. And it's like through the power of VR, then I actually get to physically experience that with my body. And it makes me wonder, like, what is impossible? Like, nothing feels impossible at that point, because you could create your own universe. You could make your dream worlds become a reality. And, like, all these different places that you'd ever want to visit, you get to create and then you can experience. And we're just on the brink of that with VR chat, where people are able to, from in their bedrooms, create places. I see a lot of worlds titled like In My Dreams or like Dream World, where people come up with these places in their heads. Like one of my friends who creates worlds on VR chat, she actually had a dream about this like oasis area, and kind of similar to almost like Dune or the Alchemist, like this idea of just this beautiful oasis out in the middle of nowhere. And she had this dream about it and then created it in VR. And that's where I met her, and we like were hanging out in that place and we were talking about that. And so it's so interesting that literally just ideas in your heads like can become physical places of the like which we get to explore. And I just think that's such a such a crazy and intriguing concept.
Yeah, for sure. yeah, it's really cool being able to have an idea in your mind that you can externalize as your sort of surrounding reality. That is what fascinated me when I started doing VR myself.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really cool. It can start off as an idea and suddenly you're there. It's a magical thing for
It
sure.
is magical, absolutely magical. So I wanted to talk a little more about the identity things. So do you think that there could be social consequences in the future? Because I know we talked about that there's not really any problems right here, right now. But for the people who might be scared of VR and what it's going to become one day, because I feel like there's a lot of science fiction-y kind of terrifying stuff. What do you think some of the like worst case scenarios are, and what could we do as a society to kind of prepare and be ready to prevent any of these like events from happening where we go too far?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there is a problem to a certain extent in the world today with addiction, right? And that can be
Mm.
addiction to anything. It can be to tomato ketchup or drugs or
I have the ketchup addiction, I'll admit.
yeah.
I'm guilty of that one.
Yeah, and also video games, right?
Mm.
So, but I mean, it's usually not a problem until, of course, it gets too much, and you're not taking care of yourself, or you're not in a position you want to be in life, etc. So, of course, VR isn't some magical thing that is not prone to addiction like
Mm.
everything else. I mean, computers and social media and everything has. I mean, yeah, meeting someone, getting recognition, releases dopamine, right? And if you have a social life only in VR and not in your real life, that may be a problem. It may not be a problem. So it's really hard to say anything general about it, but at least the addiction potential is not something that is exclusive to VR.
Mhm.
As of yet. Of course, maybe in like 100 years when you get VR headsets that you don't almost have to put on, etc., we get
Mm.
a new discussion. But then the discussion isn't really about addiction, but what is real and what is not, and what is beneficial and not beneficial with those worlds. So I don't see any danger right now. There may be one danger regarding like depersonalization. Have you heard of that?
Mm. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that that's more interesting. Maybe not addiction, but depersonalization, sort of not knowing what's real and all of that. But again, I don't think it will be a big problem. It will maybe happen to like a very small percentage, maybe
Mhm.
some people that, yeah, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, definitely lots of interesting mind things because just like we were talking about, our perception plays such a big role in how, we view reality. And so it is really interesting that if by manipulating that and manipulating brain perception, it is kind of scary in a way when you think about it, that we suddenly do have to kind of doubt like what's real and what's not real. And we have to sit down and have the conversation with ourselves like, what am I experiencing? And you have to remind yourself that it isn't necessarily the physical world that we're in. And I don't know, because I definitely find it so interesting. I love when you're talking about your memory palace, because that makes me think of I have very specific memories inside of VR. So even
Mm,
though I went
mm.
and experienced these like worlds and places inside of my bedroom, like my physical body was in my bedroom, when I like sit down and I think back on things in my head, I can have memories of being in physical places that don't actually exist. They're in the VR world that I, being next to like Totoro in the Studio Ghibli world from my last video. I have a very vivid memory of laying down on the ground and
Yeah.
seeing him sitting there, even though that wasn't necessarily real. And so I love that then you actually are kind of using that to your advantage here and building the memory palaces and taking these, memories and then making something really physical that people can then use to their advantage to help them in their day-to-day lives. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think if people think about it, what kind of memories we have, then a lot of them are very tied to places. So if
Hmm.
we get a certain, oh, I remember this song and this was the last place I was when I heard that song, or when we get an image in our heads, it's usually also like a place or somewhere we were. So yeah, the sort of visual and spatial structuring of memories is very interesting to investigate for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also I have a colleague who's studying something that is called game transfer phenomena, where you're
Okay.
sort of trying to do stuff that you can do in VR, but you're trying to do it in real life because your body has gotten so accustomed to it that you're basically trying to make it happen.
That's so
So that's also
crazy.
another aspect which is interesting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's so crazy because I've definitely kind of relating VR. I think it in a lot of ways lays over and ties into almost like dreams, and just the like philosophical aspects of how we perceive dreaming. And for
Mm.
me, like when I was a little kid, I remember very specifically one night having this dream where I was flying around my house, or I was like jumping off my bed and I was flying around my house. And then the next morning I woke up and I jumped off my bed thinking that I could still fly because I thought it was real. And so I think it totally ties into the same things with VR is our brain gets tricked into thinking these things, and then we'll start doing things that maybe we did in VR. So I think it's so cool that your colleague is also studying that as well, because there's a lot, right now, not everybody has a VR headset and is experiencing VR on a daily, regular basis. But obviously, it's becoming more and more and more popular as time goes by. More people are getting them. And so this is an experience that people are going to be way more interested in within the future. And, important issues that as an average household is able to acquire and use VR, they're going to have these questions. And so I think it's so important that we do have these discussions about things and making sure that everybody's, just thinking. I think that's the biggest part is just
Yeah.
evaluating what's going on and making sure that we're processing this information in a way that's both healthy and exciting for the future.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important too.
All right. Well, that pretty much wraps up all the things we wanted to discuss today. So was there any last comments you wanted to make or any last questions you wanted to talk about today?
No, I don't think so, but it's been very interesting for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's been so great having you on the show and getting to have these discussions, because obviously these are your favorite things to talk about and they're my favorite things to talk about as well. So it's always so cool when you get to have that kind of exchange and bond over things like that. So thank you again so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead and link all your information in the description. So if you guys do want to check out Joakim's like YouTube channel and blog, the Matrise, right? Talking about just VR and all that fun stuff, then definitely check that out in the description below. If you guys like this video, then make sure you give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to the Virtual Reality Show channel. There's always more meaningful virtual reality content in the works, so definitely be staying tuned for that. If you guys want to have more discussions like me and him had just now, then go ahead and join my Discord, link in the description, and we talk about VR related stuff there all the time. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching the Virtual Reality Show. I've been your host, PHIA, and I'll see you on next week's episode.